are going live. Okay. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to have you here. Ugh. I'm just trying to get my situation's a little disrupted because I moved my desk, so I'm just trying to get situated here. All right. So let me pull up my notes. For those of you that are new or have not attended a live before, I usually go live twice per month to answer questions that are submitted in advance and or submitted during our live event here today. For students that have joined and are participating in my courses. So usually what I do is I will address questions that were submitted in advance, but I also create moments of rest to make sure that I am answering the questions for those of you that made the time to show up live. And if for any reason we do not answer the question that you have in this session, then usually what I try to do is make sure that we pick it up again in our next session so that I try to address as many questions as possible. And of course, for those of you that do have a course with me, you also have access to our private Facebook group, so you can post your questions in the Facebook group and tag me, and I usually respond within 48 hours. As much as I can. So with that, I would like to invite those of you who are here live, if you'd like to type your name and where you're coming from in the chat. I'd love to see who is here with me. I have myself pinned, so I can't necessarily see everyone that's here with me, but I'd love to see that. And we'll just dive in. And if questions come up as I'm, going through and answering, please feel free to type your thoughts and reflections in the chat, and I will take some time to comment on them. Okay. So the first question that we have for today, after feeling drained from putting in most of the effort, how do you rekindle the desire to work on the relationship again? So I might ask if anyone here relates to this question, just give me a thumbs up or a yes in the comments, and I'll know if this question is really resonating with you. So to answer this, I might start just by saying that every time we try to impress a partner, or we try to take care of them, or we try to save them, or we try to play the role of therapist, or we try to do anything that suggests that we need to work through exhaustive efforts to make the relationship work in order to prove our lovability in some fashion, it is going to backfire on us. And it usually backfires in one of two prominent ways. The first being that you attract a lukewarm partner who is just kind of going along with it because you make it super easy for them. Or you attract a fiery partner at first who appears all in, and then suddenly and abruptly, they appear to be all out. Okay. And so I believe that we end this cycle through 4 essential steps, and I'm going to explain those now. So the first one is we need to identify the false premise about reality that we are harboring around relationships in general. So in other words, you have to work hard, right? We have to work hard to make relationships work. Relationships are hard work. Now, relationships do require effort, but they're not supposed to be hard work. Relationships are supposed to be a refuge from that kind of work, okay? And so if we are working them this hard, then there's probably a fundamental incompatibility going on, and it's likely attachment anxiety that is fueling the bus. Okay. So first, again, identifying the false premise about reality and relationships in general. Relationships require hard work. Secondly, asking ourselves, well, what beliefs do I have that fuel that premise, that keep this premise going? Okay. Well, maybe it's something like if I stop working hard or initiating, then nothing would happen or ever get done, or they'll stop loving me, or I won't deserve the love that I get, or they won't need me and therefore I won't know my place, right? So in other words, what am I afraid would happen if I stopped working so hard, right? And these are the limiting beliefs that our attachment anxiety has constellated itself around because it's usually trying to keep us safe, right? Now, the third thing is you want to ask yourself, well, what is the reward of believing that? In other words, how are these beliefs keeping you safe? So, well, if I have all the responsibility, then that means I have all the control. If I have their love, then it means I'm lovable. If I don't have to prove myself, then I have no way to justify my worth. If they don't need me, then I must have no value and I will be discarded. Okay. So the fourth thing we want to do then is to adopt a reframe for these beliefs and to take action on a different point of view. So I could never have all the control, not even if I tried. I'm lovable no matter what anyone says. Worthiness is about shame and ego, and it's irrelevant in the eyes of spirit. I want someone who loves me for who I am, not what I can do for them, right? So instead of asking ourselves, how can I zap myself into wanting to work harder than I should for a relationship that is draining me anyways, we might ask ourselves, what is this person contributing to my life, and does it improve my life or degrade it? So an improved situation looks like a healthy relationship where both partners are contributing equally, showing mutual respect, appreciation, and support. There is a generous balance of giving and receiving, where each person feels valued for who they are and not what they do. And communication is open and honest, and it fosters a safe space for both individuals to grow together and individually. Now, degrading your experience looks like toxic dynamics, where one partner feels like they're always giving more than they are receiving, or there's a lack of appreciation and respect, leading to feelings of being undervalued or underimportant, or like you always have to justify yourself. Communication is filled with things like criticism, neglect, or contempt, and it can create this very stressful and emotionally and energetically draining environment, right? So I might ask anyone who's willing to share, do you feel like your relationships are contributing to your life or draining it, degrading it, and draining your energy? So I would just have you remember that the most beautiful relationships are usually those that create a container in which you get to feel empowered, you feel cherished, you feel valued for who you are, right? Not what you're doing per se. And really, because the kind of love that you want isn't going to demand endless effort to make it work, right? There's going to be a sense of ease. There's going to be a sense of flow. And again, it's not that there will never be any effort or that you'll never come against conflicts, but the conflicts that you come up against are approached with an air of generosity and an optimism, and knowing that resolving the conflicts leads to deeper intimacy. And this creates a flow, a expectation of ease. And so it means that you're coming together to grow, to share, and support each other with harmony. And it really begins with this belief that we are enough just as we are, and we don't have to keep working it so hard. Okay. The next question. Well, before I move on to the next question, if anybody would like to let me know in the chat, do you relate to any of this? Have you ever asked yourself questions like this? I would love to know that. Okay. So the next question, you know what? I'm going to copy these and put them in the chat so that we have a good timestamp here. Copy. Put the first one in. And let's do the next one. Copy and paste. Okay. So the next question, and it I think goes really well with our first question. So is the solution to have a secure relationship simply to avoid dating avoidant people? Okay. So when we spend a lot of time and energy trying to avoid avoidant people, we're basically saying that our happiness depends upon someone else. And it also demonstrates that you're really scared of getting hurt. And so what does getting hurt really mean? Well, usually it's some degree of feeling disappointed, and that turns into resentment. And this happens when we expect things to be different than what they are. And so we need to work on figuring out what we can actually control and let go of what we can't. It also means dropping these ideas that your worth in love depends upon certain conditions, right? So if you're feeling let down by someone, it might be because you were loving them with some degree of strings attached, maybe comparing them to a fantasy of how they could change to make you happy. And now you know who they really are. And you can choose to accept that and decide what's truly right for you with the value of this information, instead of being critical or trying to make it something other than it is. And so this lets you appreciate them for helping you to adjust your vibe to better match what you really want, instead of clinging to the idea that you have to get it from them specifically. And we accomplish this by learning to trust our own strength and resiliency. Now, of course, it hurts, it stings when things don't work out, but that is just part of being human. And so the solution also isn't always to break up. Sometimes we just need to tweak our vibe, let's say, and get creative with our problem solving. So when we butt up against, let's call it a point of contrast in a relationship, usually we just have two different perspectives that are clashing, and both of you need to make a little wiggle room, a little bit of space for each other, and adjust your premises and your beliefs a little bit so you can start growing together in an interdependent way, right? So this is this fundamental challenge that we all have about learning how to be separate but together. Now, sometimes it just requires a little tweaking, and sometimes it does mean that the relationship needs to end. And that's a good thing too, because it means that you have finished one chapter and now you are ready for the next adventure. You've gotten what you needed out of it, right? That karmic contract has been resolved. Now, it kind of brings us back to disappointment, and how do we regard it then? Well, disappointment is a multifaceted, nuanced quality of energy moving through your body. And it can serve as a teacher, or it can serve as an ego concern. So when it's more about ego, we are seeking some kind of proof of our worth or validation of our pride. And if we're holding on to our pain, it's because the ego does not know how else to define itself. And that's why people, when people tell me that they want to avoid all avoidance because they're just so awful, it lets me know a few things. So number one, that their pain is probably really important to them. Number two, they don't trust themselves in their own resiliency. Number three, they may have a lack of faith in the benevolence of the universe. And number four, while they may have a lot of other forms of success, friends, material rewards, underneath all of that, they're probably still struggling to know who they are without the struggle, right? Because after all, who is a great problem solver without a problem to solve? What is a rescuer without someone to save? Who is a capable person without a crisis in which to demonstrate their capacity? And so when this happens, I know I have to tread a bit lightly, because this is very much an existential dilemma going on. But the fact that they are there and they are talking to me lets me know that they have gone through some kind of christening at some point, pretty recently. And the larger spiritual part of them is really asking for expansion and believes that it is possible and it is time. And so if we stop being afraid of disappointment, disappointment can't control us in the same way, because it's not going to compel you anymore. Okay, maybe I'll be disappointed. And so I'll let myself feel it, and then I can let it go, right? And now you're living in spirit rather than ego. Now disappointment has become your teacher, and it has become a facilitator of your expansion. Okay. So let's bring these lofty ideas into the day-to-day, right? So given all of that, we are environmentally responsive and informed beings, but we also have the capacity to conjure and wield our emotional energy intentionally. And so we do this by curating discerningly the people and the environments that we surround ourselves with, right? And that we move through. And we do this by organizing our emotional energy creatively, by learning to flow, right? The idea that personal freedom can only be found in self-discipline is a good example of this. So accepting what is does not mean that you are helpless. It actually gives you the most control that you could possibly have with the greatest use of and preservation of your energetic resources. So I'm going to give you kind of a funny metaphor to explain this. So I want you to think of it this way. Would you try to start your car with a carrot stick and then decide if you are not worthy enough or good enough for love when it fails to start? Would you assume the car is just using you, or that there must be no chance for a healthy relationship because the carrot stick isn't working? And would you spend a ton of money on coaches and talk therapy trying to convince the car that the carrot stick is a more emotionally mature choice than the car key? No, because all of these solutions are just completely irrelevant to the way that a car functions, right? And it doesn't abide by the rules you want it to just because a carrot stick is what you happen to have in your pocket. And no one ever bothered to give you a real key. So I believe that attachment styles kind of work the same way. If you have a partner with an attachment style that tends to express itself in opposition to yours, you're going to find yourself endlessly trying to start a car with a carrot and heaping a ton of painful and completely irrelevant meanings on top of your inevitable failure because you're trying to approach them from within your own perspective. But if you understand the nature of attachment styles in general and you can start shifting your perspective, you basically acquire the keys to open a car that is the best fit for you, right? Now, knowing about attachment styles can help us make informed, discerning decisions that you're not going to give a lot of, let's say, time, energy, and attention to a certain type of person in your life because you've been there and you've done that. But when we take this knowledge and we decide to vehemently push against what we perceive to be a stereotypical type of person, and then we put a lot of energy and momentum into avoiding that type of person, we wind up adding a lot of focus and fearful, emotional, energetic intensity to something we do not want. So, for example, I'm going to give you a little archetypal example with Andrea and Matt. So Andrea let Matt come and go in her life because after giving it a substantial amount of time and effort, she realized that they were just incompatible. And she did some soul searching and realized that she didn't want to put any more of her attention on a relationship that wasn't going to work out long term. And it was fun while it lasted, but she was ready to take on her lessons and find someone that just was better suited to her more advanced goals and aspirations in life. And so now, while dating, if a similar type of incompatibility pops up, she is able to take that early detour because she's learned a lesson and doesn't need to revisit it in order to make good choices for herself or prove something to herself about her worth and lovability and value. She does not need to relive it in order to revise it. On the other hand, we have Sarah, and Sarah feels deeply wounded by the end of her last relationship. She put enormous amounts of energy and effort into doing, saying, and being whatever her partner wanted. But she never felt rewarded for this or as if the love was truly reciprocated. And so she became convinced that it was because of the type of man that her partner was. And so now she has done a lot of typecasting in her relationships and in her dating, right? She typecasts the people that she meets, and she's hyper focused on anyone that meets that criteria. And so every time she finds someone that is remotely like her previous partner, it sparks this rumination over what went wrong in the past relationship and villainizing them for what happened. And then she starts scrutinizing the next person and picking apart their character and telling herself story after story about why they're probably just as bad as the last one. And she refuses to be a victim again. Now, unfortunately for Sarah, this preoccupation becomes a profound magnetic point of attraction in her vibrational field, which means that she's only going to attract more of that type of person into her experience, and therefore more and more disappointment in the avoidance of disappointment, right? So at this point, Sarah's discernment is no longer curation. It's become obsession. There is something inside of her that is all twisted up about it. And it's twisted up around the themes that this type of person is forcing her to look at. And so, like the stories, things like the stories she's telling herself inside about her worth, lovability, value, resiliency in the face of distress or disinterest or rejection. But she is not able to recognize these stories in herself and how these are the real barrier to attracting an easy and reciprocal love, because her focus is perpetually directed outside of herself and trying to control what she can't, and endlessly strategizing and moving things around like chess pieces on a game board. And so Sarah might say, I'm always so disappointed because I give so much of myself in relationships and then they don't reciprocate. And so she gives a lot of herself because she wants the partner to need her so that they don't abandon her. Or she figures, if I give more, I'll get more, which is another way of trying to control the relationship dynamic with conditions of love, right? But when a partner doesn't respond like they are supposed to, she starts sacrificing little bits and pieces of herself just to remain close to them, and starts adopting aspects of their identity to define her own identity in order to feel alive. And then she starts betraying parts of herself, imagining that her partner's tolerance is payment enough. And this often evolves into things like codependent dynamics in relationships. And now different forms of betrayal wind up becoming repetitive themes in Sarah's romantic life. And she looks out into the relationship landscape and sees the betrayal going on outside of her. But the relationship is really a culmination of different types of small and large betrayals that have been going on inside of her for years, leading up to a situation like this. And so the relationship is a mirror. And we cannot change the lipstick on our face by painting it on the reflection in front of us. We cannot avoid avoidant partners until we take a good hard look at what we are avoiding inside. And so what pain do we think that we've been caused? What trials have we suffered? And no one is saying that we haven't suffered them. But where now does that pain live inside of us? And how are we carrying the energy around them? And what false beliefs and premises does that reflect about our lovability and the accessibility of love in the world? They are outdated. And so this is the direction that we must go in bravely in order to sort and root it out. And it's always best not to operate from a place of fear, right? Out of fear, not to operate, I'll rephrase that, not to operate out of fear, but to instead to regard fear as a teacher, right? Because fear often has quite a bit to show us. And if we can operate under the assumption that fear is our teacher, instead of trying to avoid avoidant people through fearful compulsion, we can notice our fear and we can ask it, what am I really afraid of? Where am I betraying or abandoning myself here to avoid this fear? Thank you, fear, for jumping up to show me where I don't trust myself or my own resiliency, where I have moved away from my core spiritual self and knowledge. And now I can start to love myself more. I can sweep out my dusty corners and call in the massive flow of love that I'm requesting when I say I want a reciprocal love. And so once we start plugging these holes, we're just naturally going to start to move towards people who choose us, right? And you will do this by continuously choosing yourself over and over again, and choosing yourself in ways that open up connection with loving people. And you will focus upon people who demonstrate that kind of loving behavior in your environment. And as you focus upon those people, people who are unloving are not likely to register on your radar that much anymore. So there's no need to avoid anything. You just simply trust yourself to make good choices for yourself. And that's all it really boils down to. Okay. So I hope that helps in answering the question, is the solution to avoid avoidant partners? No, the solution is to look inside and to recognize what are these partners bringing up for you, and how can you embrace that as a teacher on your path. And then embracing your path and understanding is just about making good choices for yourself and focusing on what you want instead of what you don't want, right? Okay, so I'm going to pause there and just ask if any of that is relating or resonating with the folks here. Okay. Avoidants aren't awful people. Sure. Absolutely. Okay. Another question. After an avoidant partner pulls back, should I wait for them to reach back out, or what do I do? So I believe that it really depends on how you left it. So when they pulled back, did they ask for space and said that they would contact you when they were ready and when that would be? Or did they just disappear without any kind of explanation, right? So is the time spent apart really unusually long, right? So there's a few contextual things that I would need to know. Does it mean that they're not talking to you at all? Or when you say pull back, is it just your way of saying they're not communicating as much as they used to? Then also taking into consideration how long have you been dating? What is the developmental phase of the relationship? So all of those are really important contributing factors. Now, I would say if they said that they would contact you and they told you when that would be, wait for them to contact you, right? If they disappear without explanation, I would call them out on it. And I would let them know how it made you feel and what your expectations are for a long-term relationship, and then stick to them. Whether they respond or not is kind of irrelevant. You drew a line and you're sticking to it. Now, and that is true, of course, even if it means that you leave them or they leave you, because then it wasn't a good match. Now, if they've just reduced the communication and you're feeling some kind of way about that, then it may be time to explore what your mutual expectations are for contact and communication according to the current stage of your relationship development and commitment, right? Because your expectations for communication and the way that you communicate with someone is going to be vastly different in like the first 6 months to a year of dating, as opposed to you're dating someone for 6 months to a year and on, right? It's going to be very different. How to give an avoidant partner space without worrying that you are being inconsistent or that you are upsetting them. Okay. So the best way to avoid worrying about upsetting someone else is just getting really comfortable with your own upset feelings. And you ask them for clarity about what space means to them. And then you simply follow what they say, so long as you are okay with it. And if they contradict themselves by saying they're upset that you actually honored what they said and they wanted you to push harder or something like that, then that reveals a glaring emotional contradiction and an inner conflict on their part. Okay. And they need to be working that out for themselves. And maybe that's uncomfortable for them, but it's also really good and important work for them to be doing. And you don't want to steal that opportunity away from them by trying to appease their feelings because it makes you uncomfortable for them to be uncomfortable. Because really, that's a win-win for everyone. Now you get to be comfortable with all of your feelings and you're giving other people permission to have all of their feelings as well, right? So again, the best way to avoid worrying about upsetting someone else is getting comfortable with your own upset feelings. Okay. It's okay for us to be upset because there's a lot of learning and information that we gather in that. Why does my avoidant partner dislike it when I say I love you? Okay. So I gave a pretty detailed response to this in a recent video that I posted on YouTube. I'll leave a link to that in the replay of this, but I'll just answer this in brief today. So for many people that have an avoidant attachment style, the words I love you have been distorted in their experience. Either they have encountered people who are in love with the idea of being in love, and so when they hear those words, they feel like the person is no longer perceiving them for who they really are, rather than as a fantasy for what they want them to be, right? Or the words have been used as an excuse for a variety of boundary violations, usually emotional, physical, or mental. They have not experienced a very loving environment. And so in cutting themselves off from bad feelings, they may have also cut themselves off from good feelings. And so they don't really know what that word love means anyway, right? Or or in general. So it becomes kind of suspect, right? And so when it comes to someone, particularly someone that has dismissive avoidance, I usually recommend finding another way to say that. Okay. And then eventually just letting them be the first ones to say that particular phrase if necessary. But there's really no need to be attached to the specific words, I love you, in order to express the feeling. Because what is a feeling? A feeling is energy moving through your body. And you can describe that with any other number of words, right? And better yet, actions, especially when we're talking about avoidant partners. So in my experience, I find a nice substitute for that is, I feel like I'm my best self when I'm with you, right? Because really that's how avoidant partners perceive love or understand love, is when you're with someone, you're the best version of yourself, right? And that is how we eventually persuade avoidant partners to want to open up and relax their attachment style and become increasingly secure, because they come to realize that I can actually feel like I'm more of myself when I'm with this person than the permission I give myself to be, than who I give myself permission to be when I'm not with them. So this is how we can experience greater freedom in relationship than outside of it, right? And so that's why I say I feel like I'm the best version of myself when I'm with you is a really wonderful way to say I love you to an avoidant partner, because they'll get it. And once you're able to express yourself in this way, you might be surprised because they might say the I love you words to you first. Okay. Another question. And again, if there are any other, let me know in the chat, any of this resonating with you? How does this sound to you? Are you butting up against any of these questions in your own experience? I would love to know that. Let's see. Only have 2 more submitted questions and we got some time. So if you guys have things you want to ask, that'd be great. Alrighty then. Another question. He tells me he wants me in his life, but then he does nothing to prove it. Is he just avoidant or not that into me? Okay. So I also have another YouTube video that goes into this in depth. You know, he says he likes me but won't commit. So I'll leave a link to that in the replay of this video. I'm just going to give the short answer here, which is this is really the problem with incongruent behavior, right? So it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. So when someone tells you something and then they do not act on it, it's kind of impossible to trust them. So even if they do mean it, what is the point if they're not going to follow through, right? Because relationships are a wonderful gestalt of the intangible expression of positive regard and admiration, and the time, energy, and effort that goes into real world material expressions and constraints that occur in a relationship, right? So I can have great admiration for someone and I can think that they're a wonderful human being, regardless of what they feel about me or what they do and give me. I can still feel a pure love for that person. But to engage in a healthy relationship, there has to be some level of acknowledgement and reciprocation of material things, in the sense of like time, energy, effort, activities, routines of daily life, values, priorities, things that make your life feel meaningful. We're not here just to be like floating clouds on this planet. We are here to engage with the visceral. We are here to sample the varieties of life. We are here to make choices about what is and is not aligned with our curriculum in this lifetime. And so this is why it's so detrimental when we start to contort ourselves or wait around for things to happen, because we start depending upon someone else's curriculum to define our own, and that's not what we're here to do. Okay. So when someone tells you something like, I like you, but then they don't act on it, you're not going to be able to trust them, right? Because they're not going to follow through. So what's the point? And I would encourage you in that case to adopt the story that is going to serve you best. because there's also a lot of mystery there. You can't know. And if you can't know, and then if you can't trust what they say because their actions don't match up with their words, you can't know what is the ultimate truth, right? The ultimate truth is that they don't know. It's ambivalent, obviously. Otherwise, there would not be an incongruency. Okay. So adopt the story that serves you best. Is it better if they're just not interested and they're paying lip service to you to keep you around as an option? Or is it better that they love you, but they don't know how to act on it, and so it could never really materialize anyway? So which story feels better to you and is going to help you move on more easily? Pick one and let it go, right? Pick one and just keep going, because there's no ultimate truth there in that circumstance. You're going to have to decide what it is, right? Because they're not going to give you that information. They've already proven that. So pick the one that works for you and just keep going. That's it. Okay, this is the last question that we got. I miss him and keep looking for that chemistry. How can I stop wanting him when he's the one who left me? Okay, so 3 things. Number 1, redefine chemistry as an arousal state that is driven by adrenaline and dopamine highs, along with a degree of self-projection. So what did this relationship show me about myself and the way that I love? Okay. Number 2, notice what stories are coming up in your mind about your lovability, your self-worth, or your desirability in their absence or in their rejection. And ask yourself, where can I learn to love myself more? On the flip side of this, where am I sacrificing parts of myself in this relationship? Right? That's where you can learn to love yourself more. Number 3, notice your beliefs about reality in general, right? And how staying in this kind of grief state might be rewarding or protecting you. Got a phone call here. How might these beliefs, right? How might this pursuit of someone who is rejecting you, how is that keeping you safe? How is it rewarding or protecting you, right? So you might put it this way: how am I continuing to reject love and to reject myself by clinging to someone who rejects me? I'll say that again. How am I continuing to reject love and to reject myself by clinging to someone who rejects me? I might add to that also clinging to fantasies of what could have been. It's the same thing, functions the same way. Okay. So this is something usually that is keeping you safe, right? So there's a part of you that believes that in the pursuit of them, you are being kept safe, because by pursuing someone who doesn't look that closely, you're not really exposed, right? There's a part of you that's not really going to fall under scrutiny, because if someone were to look at that and they left you, then you might think, oh, that must really prove I am unlovable. So when we chase people who don't look too closely, then there may be underlying beliefs about our lovability and worthiness that we don't have to question, right? We don't have to look at too closely, and then because we fear, oh, it might be true. Now, given that, it's likely that there's a deeper spiritual part of you, which I will call the soul, that attracted this relationship so you could start to attend to and answer these questions for yourself. That's the karmic contract, let's say. But we could also say it's a dharmic requirement, right? It's a dharmic assignment. So we've been talking about this in my course, Soul Attachments, where karmic contracts are kind of more like where the soul believes that it has to relive in order to revise things, in order to balance some scale, even across in this life or even across lifetimes. Whereas if we were to adopt a dharmic principle of unconditional love and forgiveness, it's just realizing wherever we are, whatever we believe we have to relive or revise, just realizing that that's an ego construction, and it's a barrier to accepting the love that is always there and that is ever present, right? And so if we can just forgive, release, let go, allow those painful thoughts and beliefs and energy to just be released through a variety of means and methods, then we can step into our dharmic self, right? Our unconditionally loving self, and we don't have to keep reliving these things. Okay. And so but oftentimes it can be our soul that's calling in these relationships so that we're forced to ask ourselves questions like this, because once we answer them by adopting new premises, right, then all that grief is just going to make space for a much more fulfilling love to come in. Okay. So I'm going to pause there. How's all this landing? You guys have been super quiet. How is all of this landing with you? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What do you relate to? Questions coming up? How is that landing with you? Resonates with me. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. Yeah. Just going to pause, see if we have some questions popping up in other locations in the group. How should I respond to a good friend who thinks I have never had a good partner? She thinks I don't choose good men. And I'm recognizing my own avoidance. Well, so other people are, of course, entitled to their own perspective. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about why does her opinion bother you? Why does that bother you? And also, you know, if it's in part, I'm recognizing my own avoidance. Yeah. Because let's say, so my friend thinks that I don't make good choices. Her opinion bothers me because I have known her all my life. Well, that's why her opinion matters. But why does this particular opinion bother you? You think she's wrong? Do you think she's right? Do you feel like she's overstepping her bounds? Why should that opinion bother you? So certainly if you've been friends with someone your whole life, I think she's overstepping. Okay. Okay. So then this is really more of a boundary conversation, right? So you want to ask yourself, you can kind of like take a step back, and you might want to ask yourself, like, what do I value in friendship? Like, what's my biggest value in friendship? And what do I value about, let's say, this friend in particular, right? When I'm with this friend, what feels good about the relationship? And when I'm with this friend, what feels like it's overstepping? And how do I know that they're overstepping? What goes on inside my body, right? What goes on inside my mind? And then when someone oversteps, then you're able to identify, you're able to articulate, let's say, the boundary. So for example, so-and-so, you've been my friend for years and you know that I really value your opinion. And so I appreciate that you've shared your perspective with me, but to speak about this anymore in the way in which you are speaking about it just crosses a line. And this is not a topic that I'm interested in exploring further with you. And it's not because I don't love you or I don't value your thoughts and opinions, but because this topic in particular is off limits with me right now until further notice, until I say otherwise. Right. And usually it's helpful if you let people know what feels good from them. So not just like this. So not only that you're overstepping here, but also this is where I appreciate your input the most. Right. So I feel uncomfortable when we start talking about this topic because I feel like it's kind of overstepping a line for me. But what I really like is when we talk about this, and that helps me to feel really connected to you as a friend. So can we spend more time focusing on what helps us to feel connected? Right? How do you feel connected to me? Right? And then being curious, how do you feel connected to me? She is gung-ho on me having a boyfriend, but I think she wants to pick him. Well, it sounds like you're just going to have to be very clear about your boundaries, right? Topic is off limits for now. I'm in my process, right? I know what's right for me. And when I'm ready, I will explore that. And when I'm ready to talk about it with you, I will invite the conversation, but it's off limits for now. Very lovingly. And hey, let's go do the cooking class that we like to do together. Right. Thank you. Okay, I hope that's helpful. I'm married to someone who won't open up and who is an empath but can't show real empathy. He will drink to soothe the situation for himself and take no responsibility for his horrible actions when he's drunk. I keep calm the best I can and am feeling more detached with him every day. So this kind of speaks to, I think when people say empath, it's kind of a broad sweeping term. So I tend to think of there being 3 types of empathy. So there is diffuse empathy, fix-it empathy, and secure empathy. So it sounds like he has diffuse empathy, which is that he just doesn't have boundaries, right? Which is not necessarily empathy. It's more like he doesn't have an energetic filter or container for what he takes in and puts out energetically in relationship to other people. And so, yes, so soothing so then that leads to a sensory overload because the body is the first organizer of experience. And the body is how we realize we're taking in energy because the body becomes uncomfortable. And then our emotions let us know the body is uncomfortable and vice versa, right? And then our thoughts become uncomfortable. And then the uncomfortable thoughts make the body uncomfortable because of course, it's all connected and one can trigger the other. And so now we're in this heightened state. And things like alcohol, which is a depressant, feels like medication. And so we drink the alcohol to soothe, to numb the sensory overload, right? But then horrible actions are likely to be the different parts that come up, unintegrated parts that come up in that state to try to assume control. And it's likely there's a bunch of parts going on that are in conflict in that scenario, in that kind of remorse contrition cycle. So for example, I think parts work in internal family systems theory is a really great way to think about this. So person's overstimulated, has no boundaries, has no way to filter the energy that they're taking in and out. Inner child becomes helpless and scared. Firefighter, which is a managing part that controls what happens with the inner child, comes up and says, hey, you don't need to be scared. We can just drink a bunch of alcohol and make that feeling go away. So let's do it. So then they drink the alcohol and now their inhibitions are lowered. And now these other protector managing parts come on, and they usually disagree with the firefighters about how things should be handled. And they say, this is awful. That's not going to solve anything. We need to start controlling everything around us instead. And we're going to do that through awful behaviors, right? That's what's really going to keep us safe. And so what happens is when someone has all these fragmented, disparate parts and they haven't cultivated enough of an understanding to create that filter for incoming stimulation and energy, they're disconnected from their spiritual core, which in IFS would be called the self, spiritual self, but they're disconnected from their spiritual core. And so what happens is their disconnect from themselves affects a disconnection from you. And so now you start to feel disconnected from them. And over time, you may start to take that in and become disconnected from yourself. So keeping calm and feeling more detached. So it's keeping calm becomes now you're starting to dissociate, really. You're because your body in response to his body is also becoming like, this is awful. I'm trying to keep calm. So just be sure that you're not disconnecting from your signals, because your signals are also alerting you that this is not a safe situation, right? So as you detach from, and maybe there is a calmness that you've acquired because you've got skills and insight and you're here, so you're learning ways to regulate the nervous system. But remember, regulation is about not just about keeping calm, but it's also about expanding and contracting like a rubber band to allow for big feelings to exist without dismissing or disowning them. So while you're keeping calm, just be sure that you are also reading the signals you're getting, because they're important signals alerting you to your safety and the degree of connection that exists there. If you are becoming increasingly detached, I think that this is a safety mechanism, because he's not safe. He's not a safe person to be around because he's not safe within himself. So yeah, I mean, you kind of should detach, at least until he becomes a safe person to be around, right? That's a very difficult situation. I'm sending you, big hugs for that. He gets overwhelmed and dysregulated, and so I try to get him to talk afterwards. 2 more days, no luck there. Avoidance thinks it's difficult. Well, this is fearful avoidance. And so you can show up with 100% of your good intentions. You can show up having learned all the right communication skills. You can show up having crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's with all the emotional vulnerability in the world. And if he's not doing the work on himself, he will perceive it as a threat. Everything you're doing right will be perceived as a threat, because emotional expression was threatening, because he has no filter for it, right? So there's no way, unless he's doing the work, there's nothing correct that you could learn that will fix it, because you can show up with 100% of your good intentions, and it's only 50% of what's required to make the relationship work. The other 50% is on him. And you can be banging on the door with all your love and good intentions and generosity of spirit, but unless he's willing to open the door, it's not going to get in. And that's the inner work that he has to be doing. I recommend checking out the playlist on my YouTube channel, Healing the Inner Child, because it addresses that through parts work and integration. I also have a course for healing attachment wounds. And I also have a playlist on my YouTube channel, which is an introduction to that course called Healing Attachment Wounds. So definitely check that out. And I'll include links to that in the replay of this video. A friend recently said to me, "Why can't I just enjoy what we have? But my overthinking is getting in the way. I need reassurance, but I feel needy asking for it. Why can't I trust that we have a connection? Like, I need clarification of why they like me or want me as a friend. How can I reduce the need for this?" So I would have you go back and look at the first question we answered today and just go through those steps. Okay. So, and this is what we are, and Leanne, I believe you're in our Soul Attachments 101 course. This is something we can also work in with our integration sessions coming up, in our integration sessions coming up. But just kind of going back to that first practice, four steps that I mentioned at the beginning of this call, which is kind of a nice way to bookend our call here, is first you want to think about what are the false premises about reality that you're harboring regarding relationships, right? So why can't I just enjoy what I have? I'm overthinking. So what are you overthinking? What are the stories coming up, right? Just identifying them. The second thing is asking yourself, how are those thoughts? What beliefs do you have that fuel those thoughts, right? So going back to our first example, well, you have to make relationships work. What is the belief? Well, if I stop doing that, then all these things would happen, right? Or I'll lose my sense of identity, or I won't know what love is anymore. And then you want to ask yourself, what's the reward of believing those things? Well, because if I didn't believe those things and that wasn't the case, then I must not be lovable, and I don't have the control. I don't have any worth or value. I don't have an identity if I'm not trying to prove my worth or value, right? And then you want to look for the reframe in those beliefs and assume a different perspective, right? So I could never have all the control, even if I tried. I'm lovable no matter what anyone says. Worthiness is about shame and ego and irrelevant in the eyes of spirit. And, I want to be with someone who wants to be with me and not because what I can do for them, right? So translating that into what you're experiencing in friendship, like asking for reassurance in friendship is a normal and healthy thing. But if you feel like it's constant and no amount of reassurance is helping you feel reassured, then it's more than that. It's not even about them. It's about a dialogue that's going on inside of you. And that's where the parts work stuff comes in and can be really helpful in digging into our beliefs like that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I'd have you go back and watch the first part again. And we can also play with this more in our integration sessions coming up in soul attachments as well. Thank you, everyone. I so appreciate you being here, and I enjoyed the questions and discourse. It's always fun to see what people are thinking about and asking and pondering. And even if you're watching this on the replay, I invite you to just, comment with any feedback, thoughts, questions, concerns you might have, because I always take that into consideration when doing, more live streams like this. Thank you for joining me. Appreciate you as well. Thank you. Thank you. Have a great evening.